A little background what I'm doing and what I'm concentrating on my research perspective. So let's get it started. Before moving forward, I really want to lay a disclaimer here. All the research that we're going to discuss today is totally based on my additional efforts. It's not related to my present or previous employer, just trying to stay afloat on that path. And the information that we're going to discuss today is going to be used for basically building security and protection detection mechanisms, whether somebody's going to use this intelligence to build some sort of open source solutions and all that. But the idea is to just share the information with the community. And that is the most important part, because that's how you learn, that's how the ecosystem is thrived, and that's where the motivational aspect is there as well. So let's first talk about Internet of Things. If you look at like 10 or 12 years back, interconnectivity was there were routers, switches, everything, those technologies exist. But why these days, we talk a lot more about interconnectivity, the complexity, the challenges that come out of it. The reason for that is you have seen recently within the last 10 to 12 years, like the way mobile revolution have taken place, new gadgets are coming into exist. And then at the end of the day, all these systems are gadgets, devices, are all connected to the internet, right? Which means that they have some sort of interface that is either available to public or anybody can access it from anywhere on the internet, provided vulnerabilities exist, configuration flaws and everything. Another important aspect here is the data movement, right? Earlier, we don't have too many devices. Right now, mobile devices, all of this stuff, there is an app for everything, right, these days. So as the infections. So at the end of the day, you must have seen like all these devices are interconnected. Data is flowing rigorously from one device to the another. The time the data moves out from your device, it's just going to touch some another anchor point somewhere on the internet before it gets and processed somewhere on cloud, servers, end user devices, and all those kind of things. But contrary to all that aspect, why it is so much easy for attackers to go after these devices? Because in the world of attack phenomena, chain exploitation works at a greater length, right? Attackers are might not be interested in just exploiting a one system. It might be a start for them to just go ahead and exploit one system, but using that exploited system to build a whole ecosystem around it, kind of botnet or kind of compromised chain that actually go after, and they can build perform some sort of like nefarious operations on the internet, or maybe some dedicated operation depending on the model they follow when it comes to the underground cyber community. But in reality, that is the most important aspect. We are living in a world where interconnectivity is at all-time high, and this is not going to slow down. This is going to go increase at a rapid pace. And let's take a look at some of the research artifacts that have been released earlier and try to give you a quick feel what we're going to talk about down the lane, but where we stand with respect to the ongoing state. So if you look at that, was like talking about like 10, 12 years back, we were talking about on millions of devices, right? But right now in 2018, 2019, and going towards like the 2020, we are talking about 50 billion devices that we are expecting to be connected on the internet. I mean, that's an enormous base for attackers to go after, right? Okay, we can say that 70 to 80% of the systems are still going to be secured, and they're going to be updated, patched, fixed, all sort of things. But at the end of the day, 20% of the 50 billion devices are still a big landscape for the attackers to go after, or adversaries, right? Because open systems, problems, right? On internet, you find exposed systems, you can go after, exploit them, abuse them, and then turn them into, attack platforms. And one of the more important aspects of the IoT research these days is that as we talk about interconnectivity, but there is a complexity associated with that as well. So the more the system becomes complex down the lane, there will be a loopholes in those systems that can be exploited, because complexity is hard to manage down the lane. That's why in security or in any world, learning world, or in the educational world, we always say, basics are the hardest part to conquer. But when it becomes more complex at the end of the day, loopholes, systems, there will be a lot of loopholes in the systems as well. So today we are concentrating typically only on the IoT. You must have seen there are many different definitions of IoT that people talk about. Some say it's IT plus OT, it's information technology plus operational technology. Some say Internet of Things. But in this particular aspect of the talk, or in the context of this particular talk, we are going to talk about only Internet of Things. We are just generalizing the concept here, just not to get too granular at that level, try to understand how these systems are, compromised and abused down the lane. So when you say Internet of Things, it can be routers, switches, smartphones, refrigerators, smart refrigerators at the end of the day, and then you have like printers. All those systems are available, which are connected to the Internet one or the other way, right? Can this system be abused? Can this system be exploited? Or can this system be used as a platform to launch additional set of attacks? That's what we are going to look into this talk, and that is the most important artifact, because we are moving from the traditional technologies to the next set level here. And you have seen earlier that, traditional technology, we talk about IDS, IPS, antivirus, we always say those technologies are dead, right? But those are not. Still, we use antiviruses at the end of the day. However, the effectiveness is in question, but at the end of the day, that is not the case, right? Those technologies still persist, additional layers of security keep on existing, and then advancements happen in that space. But when it comes to the IoT, right, we still have like old gold devices, traditional devices, where we have routers, switches, and all those things. But right now, with the advancement in technologies, new devices came to exist, right? And then the threat models changes. And that is the most important aspect here, because at the end of the day, every new device that is connected to the Internet might have different threat model, right? And why are we saying threat model? Because in order to understand the way the adversaries are going to abuse those systems or exploit those systems, it is very much important to understand and define the threat model, because that's where we're going to decide the whole workflow execution model, the way attacker is going to target the device in areas like software, firmware, whatever the things that are being used in those devices as system components, how these can be abused and exploited. So in order to get a little bit, feel about it, we really need to dissect the device software as well as hardware components at a granular level, which means we need to build threat models around it, try to understand the whole targeted attack scenario. So let's take a look into the existing state of IoT botnets, right? Why IoT malware exists. So you talk about, I'll just put up some snippets from the media stories, try to give you a feel what the internet world is writing about it, what we are feeling. There are many botnets that we talk about in the recent times. Mirai was the first one, and we'll take a deep dive into it as well. But there are many other variants as well. So what I'm trying to highlight here is the problem is active and is really real right now. And what we are finding at this present point of time is that the things that we have not looked from design perspective earlier is haunting us, right? What I'm trying to say here is that whenever these, some of the switches, routers, or the devices that were like designed 10 or 12 years back, security was not the prime phenomena at that point of time. So the design that was constructed at that point of time is still prevailing. So what is happening right now, people started, dissecting these devices at a greater layer, right? So more security vulnerabilities are coming up, and when those vulnerabilities are reported back to the vendors, they simply fix it, right? Fixing doesn't mean changing the design of the device, right? You can go ahead and fix one component, but at the end, when more reverse engineering is being performed on the firmware, you can find more vulnerabilities. So it is not a problem, it is a kind of catch-22 situation where vendors and where the audience is in. And the reason for that is because it's so hard to change that design, which was like set up a couple of years back, but then we have to face the consequences, because at this time, security has become a prime phenomena, and people are actually going after different set of devices, doing reverse engineering for different devices and coming up with different set of vulnerabilities, whether these related to authentication, authorization, hard-coded credentials, and exposed interfaces and things like that. But this is the realistic scenario where we live in right now when it comes to the IoT. So before moving further, I think it's very important to understand the taxonomy of the IoT code, malicious code, whether it's a botnets or any sort of code which actually basically subverts the integrity of that device. So taxonomy is a very important artifact. It's really, really important to understand, how these devices are built and what kind of attack methods are being followed by attackers to actually go after these devices. At this present point of time, I'll look into 3 different variables, try to give you a quick feel. There is a device type, there is a firmware of specific architecture, and there is a characteristics and functionalities. So device type is primarily we are targeting and focusing the research on one specific device. It is okay to some extent, malware authors or adversaries, they define their code targeting specific device type. But when you have to go after broad set of infections, or you have to build botnets, you have to really go after some sort of architectures, right? So whether it can be x86, 64 MIPS architecture and all that. And why looking and dissecting the attack methodology specific to architecture is important, because whenever adversaries or attackers are drafting a code, they actually going after a specific architecture rather than going after a specific device type. There are certain cases where they can only target some of the device types, but the more important artifact is the architecture. Because what happened in that case, once they define a uniform code that is targeting a one specific architecture, whether it's a MIPS or x86, right? Then they can just run a mass scan, find a vulnerable devices on the internet, and they just can upload the code based on the vulnerabilities or reconfiguration or default passwords, whatever the case is, right? In that particular case, they don't have to worry about that. They have to first find a one specific set of device, and then they have to go after them and find whole set of ecosystem of those devices. They can simply go after broad set of devices, and that's how IoT botnets are formed these days. Moving further, just a little overview of how the attack works and how these IoT botnets basically function on the internet. So you look at whether we talk about cameras, routers, switches, video conferencing systems, and all those other kind of things. They are running with a specific set of firmware, right? Specific to some sort of architecture, which we discussed earlier, 86, 64, MIPS, Linux, and all those kind of things. But the most important artifact is the first case is they have to actually compromise the device. It can be a vulnerability, it can be some inherent flaw or a design abuse case, which attackers go after and just simply upload the code, right? So you can clearly see when the malicious payloads are uploaded on all different devices, they are going to subvert the basic integrity of these devices, right? Once they subvert the integrity, they actually compromise the whole system. Basically, they have the full privileges of that system, either through escalation or some exploiting some local privilege flaw as well. From there onwards, they start launching another set of attacks, which means that they can use the one video conferencing system or a one IP camera to actually launch attacks on the other set of devices, and then find more devices on the internet and things like that. And I'll probably show you a lot of evidences on that part as well. From there onwards, they are going to target and launch attacks on a specified end users or enterprises. We have seen that Mirai botnets was used to launch the attack against 10 network. Resulted in significant losses as well. But this is a basic overview. There can be variants of this execution model, but still at the end of the day, this is the way it works and all that. Let's take a look into some of the compromised devices, right? So what we're going to look into right now is once your device is compromised, what kind of attacks can be launched from that system, right? The most important one, what we have seen is that to basically, enhance the botnet, right? Your one IT device is compromised, the payload is there, it's going to initiate the telnet session or FTP session or any kind of session specific to protocols, which actually gives you the remote access to other devices, and then either launch brute force attacks or password cracking attempts, try to actually gain access to other IoT devices. But you can see that attackers are not using their own machines or data centers. They are using already compromised machines to actually enhance the coverage in that sense. Otherwise, distributed denial of service attacks, sending phishing emails for those devices which has some sort of SMTP interface where you can still trigger some sort of emails when it's connected to the internet and all that. In addition, we also seen mining cryptocurrency. Some of those kind of things has also been used by these devices depending on the power of the underlying GPU or the system they have. But at the end of the day, if you have thousands of devices, you can still harness the power on the top of it, and then you can go ahead and launch mining attacks. Moving further, so in the next section, right now, what we have discussed about is what is the state of the IoT. We have looked into how the IoT botnets are from basic workflow model. Then we have looked into how these compromised IoT devices are abused. And then now we're going to take a deep dive into step by step into some of the, the code we have seen in the wild and what it means. This actually helps you to understand, like it does to us, to understand how different kind of functionalities that are being given or being designed for these kind of IoT botnets. So let's start it. The first one is, of course, we're going to talk about distributed denial of service attacks, different functions and all that. This is, I think, what are the different set of IoT botnets that we have analyzed. Like this function is applicable everywhere. By default, DDoS function has to be there. So the code that actually being highlighted here is launching some sort of a black nurse denial of service attack. And you can see that it has other capability of launching UDP Flutter as well. So considering that scenario, which means that launching distributed denial of service attack is one of the prime target for these IoT botnets, because they can just let the network go down pretty fast and things like that. And let's just take a look into the different set of distributed or denial of service attack that we have seen being used by these IoT botnets. They have like different terminology, but you can, in generalized way, they can pick up any protocol, whether it's HTTP, whether it's a TCP, whether it's a UDP, and they just use these protocols to launch different set of attacks. Because a couple of the IoT devices have these kind of interfaces available, like they can accept TCP packet, UDP packets, they can accept HTTP packets because they have available interfaces. So those kind of things, but denial of service is one of the most important functionality that has been noticed in IoT botnets. Let's just take a look into the next one, bot kill. Right, personally, I think this is a fantastic concept when these IoT bots actually have to go after and enhance their sphere. What I mean by that, okay, let's say there are two infections. We detected two compromised IoT devices. There is a bot A running on the compromised device A, and then there's a bot B running on the compromised device B. Somehow, the compromised device A basically attacks the device B, and then able to upload a payload on the device B. What bot kill means in that scenario is that the payload that has been transferred from the device A to the device B has the capability to detect whether there is some sort of bot running in the device B or not. What it means that, the bot wars, this is a concept known as bot wars. I mean, they fight with each other, and when they just get onto the same compromised system, they trigger the code, inherent code, they actually detect, okay, there is another bot in the system, I'm gonna kill it. If I need privilege escalation to just go after, they trigger that payload and they just go ahead and kill the other bots so that the botnet they are performing are free from other sort of bots, right? So that's why we have seen this functionality is a pretty good one. And it's not like only related to the IoT botnets in general. They're like financial set of botnets, they have this capability because they really want to have the big set of botnet, and that is the most important part for them. The more bots are into the network, the more important or more advanced they become, and then they can be very, very devastative on the internet. But the highlighted code actually shows that what kind of logic is being run to detect whether there are some compromised processes on the system, so that the one specific bot can go after and kill the other bot. Very fantastic concept when it comes to infections. Another important aspect that we have seen is the system lockup and kill all. What it means by that is that they have this kind of functionality built in. What they go after is that they just simply kill all the processes, clean the system, and let the system reboot, and then they just can reinitiate the infections again, right? And that is also a kind of pretty good functionality, but it's not being heavily used until unless they want to break a certain system, or they just want to feel that, okay, this system has gone out of the reach and we just really want to kill all the processes, let's get it rebooted so that the main bot actually go after and launch other attack to just get it compromised again. And this actually we'll discuss this concept later down when it comes to persistence, so they get a better feel of it, what we mean by system lockup and kill all. Moving forward, reverse shell. I think this is a de facto functionality in majority of the bots. What I mean by that is, let's say you have compromised one specific IoT device, right? The attackers need an access to that device to perform some sort of updates and other things, right? So the payload actually consists of a reverse shell component, which actually listens to a specific socket on that IoT device and actually open up an interface for the attacker or for the attacker to actually go ahead and access the system remotely to perform some operations, cleaning operation, updates, and all those kind of things. And this is also very important because let's say tomorrow the compromised devices tell that interface and that interface is not working, then they can actually trigger the reverse shell and actually still gain access to the system to find out why the IoT malicious code is not working on that compromised device. So there are different functionalities, different stuff related to it, but I think we have seen these functionalities when we analyze IoT botnets, and this actually gives you a lot of intelligence when you're trying to build detection and prevention solutions, because you can see that at the network level, we can still see this kind of traffic going to IoT device, which is actually triggering a reverse shell, right? Otherwise, we always say reverse shell, maybe end user devices and compromised clients and all that, but in this case, it is an IoT device. So they have this kind of functionality built in. Moving further, this is a busy box execution. The most important concept that also we want to look into is like the kind of software packages that are being installed on these IoT devices. We have seen that in order to support the embedded like HTTP server or the firmware itself, they are shipped with some sort of open source packages. Because at the end of the day, IoT device is still running a kind of minimum embedded web server in itself, or some another kind of component which is small in nature. They have to perform specific set of functionalities in order to make the operation happen. But in this case, we have seen that the majority of devices are being shipped with the busy box. It is a small binary that actually have some pre-compiled Unix binaries into it. So what you can do, you can call this binary and then you can trigger different set of commands on that IoT device. And if you see clearly in this particular case, they are exporting some functions and doing some other operations, but they are calling the BusyBox binary in that sense. And down the lane, when we're going to look into the real-time evidences from the compromised devices as a part of our forensics, you will see that how this BusyBox play a critical role in that. But the important concept here is that some of the pre-compiled and shipped packages are also being abused by the adversaries in this case, because they have the packages available on the device. They just go ahead and utilize those packages and then actually reduce the size of their payload, because they don't have to upload or embed any kind of additional packages in the payload itself, because those packages are already available on the device. So this is a very, very important part here. Moving further, another one is the Dropbox SSH server and the client. Again, I mentioned they still have the capability of reverse shell, but then they have utilized these kind of packages as well. What it means that the payload or the system itself has this package available. The IoT bot or the IoT malicious code residing on a compromised devices can call this, and then they can have like a SSH communication setup for performing different set of operations. So importantly, here is the difference, right? When the attackers are designing their bot binary or a payload, they want to make sure the payloads are of the minimum size, right? The reason for that is because the lesser the size is, most of the time they can bypass the network level protections, they can truncate the payload, but when the payload is really large, it can detect certain kind of threshold based detections or patterns on the network level. And that's the reason pre-compiled packages in the firmware itself can be a very good standard for them to just go after and call those binary, because those are available. They are being used heavily these days in majority of the IoT botnets. Data encryption, I mean, we all know, encryption is just like to set up anonymity over the data channel or the storage data. Try to make sure that if somebody get an access to that, I'm not able to find it out. Similarly, with an IoT bots, the way their payloads are designed, they have this functionality in order to protect the firmware or the payload from reverse engineering. I mean, they can have little kind of simple XOR operations and all that, which is just not that hard to decrypt or reverse engineer, but we have seen some traces of those as well. But you can clearly see on the bottom, there is an XOR encryption being used, just try to say that, okay, if they have embedded like username or passwords on some another kind of information, they can just encode it accordingly or encrypt it accordingly so that you don't find it. But once you reverse engineer the payload, it's just so easy to decrypt or decode it. But we have seen this kind of functionality in the design as well. Again, going back to our taxonomy, which we discussed earlier, we have seen in a couple of bot binaries that they have explicitly specified the architecture, right? So you can see that there will be like x86, 64, MIPS, ARM, and all that. That's why when we discuss about the taxonomy, this was the most important part, right? Because that's how they're gonna run the payloads, like small modules that are available in one of the primary payload. They can detect the architecture. Okay, this system is x86, I'm gonna do this kind of activity. Okay, this system is primarily a Linux one, I'm gonna do some privilege escalation, and then I'm gonna trigger our payloads. But they detect the device type primarily while detecting the architecture. And that is the code actually we've seen in the wild that they do that. And they actually send that information back to the command and control channel as well. And if you look at the code on the side, it's actually sending some sort of build details there as well. Just a generic information, Mirai botnet, any other set of botnet, they have like simple standard embedded, username and passwords. These can be default passwords and stuff like that, but they have those storage credentials, basically these credentials embedded in them, so that they can just simply launch the attack whenever they open up some kind of session from the compromised IoT device. Now, another important part that we have seen here is that apart from the payloads and all that, sometimes if the attackers want to enhance the functionality or enhance the infection strategy on the compromised IoT devices, they can simply instruct the compromised device to fetch some sort of shell scripts on the fly. And we discussed about that pre-compiled packages that are available on those devices. You can clearly see there is a package called as wget. This is also available in most of the firmwares that are being used for IoT devices because they are running embedded HTTP web server. So you have wget, so they call the wget, fetch the shell script or any kind of advanced payload directly from the internet and then install it on the device. And they can enhance the functionality in that way. And this is being used extensively. So anybody ever analyze IoT botnet down the lane, you will see traces when you perform forensics, log analysis like wget, BZBox, and the dropbear. You find traces of those packages a lot when you analyze any kind of compromised IoT device. Moving further, there's another different variant of the scripts. That's how they communicate. You can see that whenever they are fetching the resource using wget, they can set up a resource in an encoded way. They can use obfuscation and things like that so that this won't get detected at the network level. But contrary to that aspect, you can still detect it, but you need to have the intelligence like how IoT devices are being compromised and what they are going after. Moving further, this is the same kill-all functionality where they just simply used in picking the device. They say, the attackers find out, okay, this device is useless. I'm not going to do anything much with it. Let's just all kill all and then just brick the device, take it off the botnet ecosystem because we don't need it anymore, and then things like that. But this can be somewhat resulting in some sort of permanently denial of service attack, depending on the design of the payload. But this is also code that is being seen. You can clearly see the shell script is executing change mod, read, write, execute, and sort of different things like that. Similarly, another variant of the same script actually shows that this is being kind of uniform when the attackers want to go after and extend the functionality on the compromised device. So we have seen that in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, like Mirai botnet was the first one that came to exist, right? And this botnet was extensively used to trigger distributed denial of service attacks. From last 4 years to this time, we have seen variant of IoT bots that are based on the Mirai source code. And we're going to see some evidences based that we took from the compromised IoT devices that we were analyzing. Due to some constraints on my end, I'm not able to demonstrate it. Like I can't show right now compromised devices and how they're launching brute force attacks. But I have taken some snippets out of it, which I'll show you so that you get a feel of it, that what we are talking about here is the real world scenarios, the real world infections we are encountering. And this actually gives you a quite, I mean, you can encounter the things yourself, like, how advanced these things have become and how these things are being, compromised in an automated manner. So I will reiterate the same model to just try to give you an idea that the evidences that we're going to see going to map back to these 5 buckets, primarily the last 4 buckets. So generally, compromise the device, fetch the malicious payload, execute the payload, get the privilege escalation, and then launch different set of attacks which the attacker wants to, and then expand the botnet. This is that simple workflow model. Now let's take a look at the first evidence. So what we have done is, as a part of our mass scanning activity and some other kind of things where we just simply try to find, there's some systems available on the internet which are not secure, so we work with a responsible disclosure fashion. We try to work with the, vendors and also with the end user organization. In that case, where we have seen like these devices are available, exposed on the internet, and tell them, hey, your devices have been seen compromised. You need to work on it, configure it well, secure it, or update the firmware. So for that, we have to actually perform a lot of log analysis, forensics on the top of it. But today, what we are going to cover right now is a set of debug logs, a low-level debug logs that are being generated by a compromised IoT device. And then you will see that whatever the concepts we have discussed, from fetching a payload, using wget, using BZBox, and things like that, these are all are real. Let's take a look at the first example here. So this is taken from the compromised device, and you can clearly see in this case here that the highlighted code shows that how wget command is being used. It is being used to fetch the payload or a shell script, bins.sh and the tftp.sh from the remote IP, which is a compromised IP as well, or basically a CNC IP. And then you can clearly see if you run that shell scripts and other things on any antivirus detection solution, because it's a bit old in that sense, you can clearly see the detections have been triggered. So this snippet is basically taken from the low-level debug logs from the compromised device. There's a set of logs that you can see, but then you have to mine those logs to get the information out as well. Moving forward, so we talk about where we have set up a baseline that Mirai was used earlier, and now there's a lot of variants. You must have seen, I mean, if you search Google around, there are a couple of variants, but we are seeing some new set of variants that came to exist within the last few months. So look at this particular example. This is again a debug logs, and you can clearly see there is a call made call as create session. It's a telnet session being created. From there onwards, it performs some activity, and at the end, there is a bin BZBox and the string that is called as an anarchy. In this case, this string is somewhat related to the anarchy bot, which is an advanced version of the Mirai botnet. But you can clearly see like this kind of bots are existing in the wild right now. Let's just move to the next slide. Another variation that we have seen, same workflow model, but what we have seen here is that they call it as a cult bot. So you can clearly see BusyBox is still being called, right? And then the string call as a cult in that sense. It is another different variant, perform different set of functionalities as opposed to Mirai, but still inherent some sort of functionalities from the Mirai itself as well. But this is again from one of the compromised video conferencing device. Moving forward, another example. This is a third variant. This is called as Sora bot. You can clearly see the highlighted one. Similarly, the BZBox is being called to execute the bot payload here. And that's what we discussed earlier, like BZBox provides a capability to the attacker to trigger or execute Linux commands on the fly, and they can execute scripts, payloads, or compressed versions of code the way they want to. So this is the third variant that we have seen recently in the wild as well. So all these snippets have taken from the compromised devices on the internet. So I was just doing some research yesterday and all that. So this news came out yesterday. The hacker builds massive botnet using IoT device that are Hawaii-based, 18,000 routers in just 24 hours. And it's expanding. But that bot was the anarchy bot, which I just show you right now. This is the one where we have seen, but we have not seen it on the Hawaii router. We have seen it on some another IoT device. That validates our fact that discussion that we did earlier, that we have to be architecture specific. In this case, attackers still go after Hawaii routers because he found a vulnerability and then actually exploited that vulnerability. But in addition to that, this particular bot is not only present on a one specific router. We have seen traces on different video conferencing systems as well. So the research still keeps on going on, but this is the reality. The news just came out yesterday, which validated the infection that we have seen related to an ArchiBot is kind of real. But now when it becomes to the security intelligence aspect, right? Somebody found it on a Hawaii router, we found it on somewhere else, and then all this intelligence is going to come together to build more robust and interesting approach to defend attacks against IoT devices. Another example from the compromised device, you can clearly see how it works. Again, a debug logs. I highlighted the scenario where it triggered the telnet client call. And I've seen that sometimes this telnet client function is also available in some of the IoT devices as well as a part of their embedded firmware. So you can clearly see it started with the UI message, which is a low-level AVC, audio-video converter library, which is being used here. And they actually pick the library, call specific modules, initiate the telnet client, and they trigger root, and then the password was ANCO, and then it enters into their standard execution flow model, and you can clearly see it enables the system and then went ahead with it. But you do a little background research whether it's a real brute force or password cracking attempt, and when you did that, that default password was a kind of alert notification being pushed in certain security solutions, which is called as a certain Unix system as a default password called as ANCO for a username root. So this is all going out from the compromised devices. We have seen traces where the brute force attempts have been rigorous, like the threshold is just too high. They're gonna run it like tens or thousands in a short period of time. And we have also seen traces where they have run it really slow, in a kind of a sneaking attitude, like you just go ahead, run one, get into sleep mode, run another one, get into sleep mode, and things like that to just bypass the threshold mechanism. But all these examples, evidences have been taken from the real world devices. We are now working with a couple of vendors highlighting whose systems are being infected so that they get a feel of it and try to understand how these systems got infected, what they have to do, and why users are, like administrators who deploy these IoT devices are not paying close attention to appropriate configuration and things like that. But this is all real. Now, considering all the concept that we talk about, building threat models, taxonomy, the way IoT botnets work, understanding functionalities, looking some evidences, we conducted a small study. We look into a different set of IoT bots here, and then we pick up like 10 or 15 different characteristics and functionalities and try to map it across all set of IoT bots. And this is very much important because whenever you build metrics, which I used to call as comparative metrics of functionalities or characteristics of IoT bots, is very much important to get the idea by looking at the bigger picture, right? And you're only analyzing one IoT bot, but there is another one, and then you put it on a wall, and then you build the model, and you look at, hey, okay, I'm talking about persistence, but it's not a capability or functionality of all the IoT bot, but only one does that. So this kind of information, a real world scenario, actually help you to prioritize the kind of solutions you want to build. And let's just take a look at that variable matrix. So we're looking into Hajime, Persirai, Amnesia, Bricker versions, Mirai, and then IRC bot as well. So considering we took the the functionalities, like how the CNC architecture is, CNC communication protocol, persistence, of course distributed denial of service capabilities, brute force, kill bot feature, whether they have defensive tactics like restrictive scanning or something, which means that you belong to a specific organization which builds security solutions, like if the bot or the payload is trying to launch brute force attempts, they're not going to scan that thing. So they put up a filters in the bot itself, don't scan these IPs, because if you're going to scan it, you're going to get detected, and then that's not the kind of botnet they want to build. So they have functionality we call as defensive tactic called restricted scanning, Of course, device bricking, once and all, just brick the device. It's called as a PDoS, permanent denial of service, IP spoofing, virtual machine detection, and things like that. So we map it across all these or sort of 7 malware IoT botnets, and this actually gives us a lot of interesting information from security intelligence perspective. And you can just go ahead, one can use this information to prioritize what I'm going to go after, whether I want to actually dethrone, want to build some solution, or some filters, or some kind of signatures to only restrict certain set of operations, or I'm going to go full. So these kind of studies are kind of very important to get a uniform view across different malware families. We did that, but then there's another botnet families that are building up, coming up, but at least it actually gives us a very defined standard to actually go after and look into the bigger picture by building a comparative matrix of different functionalities and operations. Similarly, Sarikata and different, they come up with a string-based detection solutions. Okay, if you're running in a passive way on a compromised devices, or you're looking at some network level communications, you can build these kind of simple signatures. You can clearly see BZ bin box if it is being used with wget, and then some sort of a sky string and all that. So these kind of researchers all across the community keep on adding more valuable information and intelligence on the top of it, and that's how I think the security community works, and that's how you build a proper intelligence platform down the lane, typically open source as well. But it's really important to share this kind of information with the community, because that's how the ecosystem is built, and that's how we actually go ahead and share the information. But this is all, and so we have gone through a full flow model, starting from how the IoT botnets work, how you can build signature, how you can build up detection and prevention solution. I want to go a little bit deep into the prevention and detection solution. We have new technologies coming up, started with data mining, we went to machine learning, we even touched the NLP, now we are talking about artificial intelligence. But again, at the end of the day, you have to mine the data in a logical manner and use security intelligence together to actually build the robust security solutions. Because without security intelligence, it's tough to build solutions. You can detect anomaly, but you might not able to detect a very robust attack without security intelligence. Because at the end of the day, whatever the models you build, still security intelligence is gonna be added topping to it and actually define naming conventions, variables, and things like that, the way you wanna run your model on the top of it. That's why it's just, you have to correlate a lot of intelligence together when you build your machine learning models or AI models. So at the end, I want to just lay stress on that the world we are living in, it is connected, it's going to explode. It is still exploding, but it's still going to explode down the lane as well. So wherever we talk about billions of devices, complexity increases, challenges do increase with it as well, right? Data movement is happening at a very rapid pace. It's touching at different anchor points, moving on the cloud, moving on the different servers, moving end user devices, and things like that. And the concept of privacy has become much more challenging down the lane, even right now, but with more devices that are going to burst into the internet, we're going to face severe challenges as well. In order to combat that, I think community has to come together, share information, share intelligence at the end of the day, and then we have to keep evolving. Security is never a one-layer process. It's a multi-layer process. That's how we build defense in-depth strategies. And now we have to move it to the IoT space as well. It's not we are only living into the world where antiviruses are there, IDS, IPS. We're living in the world of cloud. Now attackers are going after IoT. So we have to change and man a little bit ways to actually cover all those devices into the same spectrum of security. And that being said, I think we still have 10 minutes. We can open the questions. If you have any, more than happy to help. Yeah, sure. Can you read the mic?
So have you done any work or seen any work for more like network forensics based detection of botnets and that sort of thing, or is it usually, do you think the direction for detection and fighting against it is more monitoring the devices or monitoring inside people's organizations?
Yeah. So just want to repeat the question again, just for a quick sec. So I think you're asking for why it is even important to have a network level communication analysis whenever basically the traffic analysis in order to build security intelligence apart from the standard log analysis and forensics on the compromised devices.
Right.
No, I did a good set of work in the network layer as well, where we looked into detecting the botnets that use DGA communication and some of other stuff like that. So you have to actually go after first understanding how the botnet operates. For example, domain generation algorithms. Just an example, they came to exist because attackers have hard-coded IP addresses. They simply initiate a connection. Once you reverse engineer it, you get the IP, and then the CNC communication can be easily detected. They came up with the DGA design. Okay, you have a DNS. It's just going to generate in a random fashion. One DGA will pick up a one domain name, which is being set up by the attacker. Then it's initiate the DNS connection, get the IP, and trigger that. No, I think I'm totally in line with you. This is just one aspect of where we are looking into IoT devices right now. Network level is an inherent part of any detection and building security solutions. Analyzing network level traffic is very much important, and that's how you get a feel of how the protocols are being abused or exploited, right? If you don't look at it, then there is no fun on that part. So I think it is very important to look into that aspect as well, and we do in our research at the network level as well.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's it.
Hi.
Yeah, we're out of time.
I'm sorry, we got to go.
Oh, sorry.
After the-